Hello, time to start a new video. This one is going to be about what I call the Central America Plan. Now, this was actually one of a person's original ideas that they had quite a while ago. Also, apologies for the poor drawings of Central America. Should probably define El Salvador's border a bit more clearly. Anyways, here's what the plan boils down to. This is Central America. Some people include Panama, but I don't, because I consider that more in line with Gran Colombia. And these places, except for Belize, were all part of one country at first. The Federal Republic of Central America. And so that's how I define Central America, is based on the old state. Plus Belize, because, let's face it, the Mosquito Kingdom and Belize were under Britain, and so if they were to fall to anyone else, it would likely be Central America. Doesn't make sense counting them separate, in my opinion. So here's what the plan is. 1. Get them to help with the cartels. And when I say get them to help, I mean by any means necessary. The reason the cartels are the first stop is because they traffic a lot of things through the area. In particular, they take advantage of refugees and immigrants and use them to make a quick buck. As a result, cartels, not a fan of them, and they should be targeted. Assuming the governments don't, and this is important, overthrow them if necessary. That is the offer. Do as we say or get overthrown. Now, I don't want to establish dictatorships. Frankly, those are inefficient. But I have no problem overthrowing a government if it's clearly not acting in the interest of the people. 2nd, crush corruption. This is a issue that is seriously spread out among Latin American countries. For example, here in Costa Rica, it's less of a problem. Costa Rica is actually pretty good when it comes to not having corruption. But the rest of Central America, barring maybe El Salvador, is rife with corruption. First, let me label them though, so you know who they are. Guatemala, El Salvador, literally the savior. Honduras, Nicaragua, probably butchered that, but whatever, and Belize. So these are the 6 countries that would be relevant to this. Wouldn't be as needed here, but it would definitely be needed in the others. Except maybe El Salvador. They're dealing with a lot of their own things, though how they're doing it is a bit too much like Singapore for my liking. Admittedly, it freaking works, but it's definitely going to have to be reformed away from. 3. Send migrants back. See, if a migrant, aka an illegal immigrant or illegal alien, is in the United States, and they're from one of these places, what better way to help them, these countries, than sending them back after giving a short education on something that the migrant cares about to these countries, because then they can help their own people while simultaneously getting a good job. In fact, if we send them a small amount of money to help with these businesses along with protection, we could see these businesses thrive. And if, say, a loan was given for that financial aid and they pay it back, the United States is actually in a profit. Furthermore, stabilizing these regions naturally means better trade with these regions, so more money to buy U.S. goods, and simultaneously more ability to fill in for raw materials that the American market needs. And of course, one thing I'd also argue for is unification. See, the separation of the Federal Republic following their leaving of the First Mexican Empire was a bad thing overall, I'd say. For one, you're in Central and South America. More accurately, it was just a whole Latin American problem where caudillos and other military warlords are freaking everywhere. So, breaking up was not a good thing. Furthermore, you also have to consider the corruption that's very hard to dislodge as a smaller country, especially when you consider, other powers are having a lot of interest in you. For example, in Nicaragua, there are plans to build a canal about here. This is to rival the Panama Canal, and naturally it's not a good thing overall because it usually means a lot, and I do mean a lot, of competition, sabotage, and just general insanity. And so, unifying these all into one big country allows them to be stronger and naturally resist foreign interference more. If it's under the U.S. watchful eye, sure, it'll have a lot of U.S. influence, kind of inevitable. I'm not against it, necessarily, but it will be able to resist influence from, say, cartels and foreign countries a lot easier. Plus, it'll have easier times negotiating. For example, let's say a cartel in Mexico wants to trade into Central America. It's a lot easier when you're pushing through only Guatemala's military or through Costa Rica, which doesn't have a military. It's a lot harder if you're fighting all of them at once. Of course, I'd argue for a revamped constitution along American lines for obvious reasons, because I really would like to guarantee natural rights to all the people of these lands, and further investment in infrastructure and trade with the U.S. See, the Central America Plan's goal is essentially stabilizing one region so that peace can reign in that region. It's also a very good testing ground for a lot of what I would call a-personalized plans involving foreign invasions and influence. The goal is to reduce corruption, get rid of known threats to the people, simultaneously restoring their economies, and uniting them if I believe that it is better to maintain order. So, what are the benefits of this plan? Assuming everything works as intended, which there likely will be hiccups, that's just inevitable, you'd have cartels weakened. Not just weakened, they'd also be surrounded. Because you'd have U.S. and Central American troops at their borders on both ends. This is, of course, assuming Mexico isn't first when it comes to it. Another advantage is less corruption. It should be fairly obvious how beneficial that is. And then, along with that, you have increased trade. Greater economic development. And thus reduce poverty. Protections of natural rights. And finally, increased peace. See, a lot of conflict comes from these smaller countries who have differences due to a number of factors. For example, there was a war between El Salvador and Honduras over disputed territories. More specifically, these territories that were owned by Honduras had a lot of El Salvadoran migrants because El Salvador had more people, and so illegal migrants moved into Honduras because they wanted jobs. That caused a lot of issues between the two, and it escalated into a war after a football match, or as us Americans properly call it, soccer. Yeah, fight me on that, Europeans. Yeah, it's called the football war, whole thing, you can look it up. Similarly, it's also led to a lot of foreign threats. For example, did you know an American filibuster in this context meaning a person who goes out and overthrows a government on their own, overthrew the entire government of Honduras and established an American dictatorship. Yeah, he also kind of caused Costa Rica to lose a lot of their people due to a disease, so, not fun on that aspect, but, when in Rome, I guess. His name was John Walker, by the way. Weird story. And of course, you have things like the dictatorship set up in Guatemala, Nicaragua, and the rest of Central America due to a number of things, mainly US and Soviet infighting, Contra, Sandinista rebels, Sandinista, ones who was in government. Let's just say this region is not known exactly for peace and stability. And I blame this largely on its separation because by being split up so much, it's a lot easier for smaller groups to take control of the territory. Essentially, you don't need as big of a faction to take control of the entire country. For example, Costa Rica's stability is largely due to 1. Trade, and 2. They don't have an army that can be used as a faction to push on their political system. They're also small enough that it doesn't really matter. But up here in Honduras, that's not the case. They have an army. So it's not hard for, say, some entrepreneur, American, likely a filibuster, or a foreign government like China, Russia, the US, CCP, Soviet Union, whatever, to overthrow the government by just backing a few important people. Pay the general of the army enough, and he may well overthrow the government. And once that's established as commonplace, you're not going to have stability for long. But by uniting this, it's a lot harder. Think about it. If only 1 or 2 cities is really that important in terms of the grand scheme of things, the army occupying those cities means checkmate, you're done. Sure, you might have some guerrilla skirmishes in the rural areas, but as far as things are concerned, the country's gone at that point. It's owned by the new government. But if there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cities at least that are of importance, well, then it's a lot harder fight, and it's a lot harder to justify to the military, we should really overthrow this government, because they're factoring in also, we'd have to cover a lot of ground to do so. Secession's a theoretical possibility, but if everything's tied together, that becomes less and less viable. Think about the United States during the Civil War. Because of its connections, north and south, to each other, when Civil War broke out, each side suffered massively. The North less because they had foreign trade with Britain, but the Confederacy, which was reliant on U.S. cotton trades, basically bankrupted itself almost immediately. King Cotton was no king. He was held up on a throne of lies. And so the result was that the Confederacy lost. It's the same case here. Let's say everyone in Costa Rica decided, you know what? We don't want to live in this country. We want our own country. We want to reform Costa Rica. So they revolt. They're already integrated to this economic system. That is likely going to cost them immediately. So it ensures these things, yes, but it also, through unification, ensures that leaving is less desirable, meaning unification under a federal republic will last longer. Furthermore, because it's all under one administration, trade rules can be standardized and other such things can be done to ensure free flow of goods and people, and thus economic development. Anyways, that'll be all for now. Have a good day.